Hey everybody, welcome to week 5. Unfortunately, I'm not available this week, so this was actually planned ahead, and I thought this week would actually kind of fit the fact that I was going to be out of town a little bit better than most. A lot of this material, honestly, I would encourage you to look in the Belcher text because a lot of it is pretty helpful for your writing, but it doesn't really lend itself well to discussion. A lot of kind of structure and fundamentals of writing, some ways to kind of check your work that will make for a better manuscript, but at the same time, it's not so much conceptual like I like in our discussions. So we're going to take probably a half an hour today to go over the giving, getting, and using feedback. I have graded your first abstracts and have provided you with some handwritten feedback on that. Moving forward, I will be transitioning over and doing the track changes on Word. So this was a helpful reminder for me as well. My very first college class was taught by an individual with a master's in English. He's gone on and gotten his doctorate and is now actually the president of the college where I took my very first course. And I can remember sitting in his class day one of my undergraduate career, and I thought I was a good writer. I had spent some time in high school writing a research paper that in retrospect, it was terrible, but I remember kind of walking in there thinking, oh, composition, this is going to be a breeze. I can write better than most people. I didn't really love writing the way I do now, but I felt like it was a skill that I had. And the very first day of class, I remember then Jody, we called him, now Dr. Rice. The very first thing he said at 9 a.m. on Monday morning of my college career was, "Don't fall in love with the first draft. It's probably not that good." And that was a bit of a wake-up call to me. And frankly, I was a little offended. I thought, how do you know? You've not even read my writing. But in retrospect, he was 100% correct. That first draft isn't usually that good. And even the 10th draft isn't usually that good. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes purposeful attention to detail in order to make your writing tight, concise, cohesive. So with that said, if my first draft isn't that good, what do I have to do between the first draft and the last draft to ensure that the final copy is that good? And I apologize. It sounds like we're being invaded. So if you can hear that through the microphone, I apologize. So feedback comes really in two primary forms. First of all, like the Writing Center discussed, there's kind of general or conceptual feedback where someone reading your work kind of gives you the view from 100,000 feet, and they kind of help you determine whether or not your scope is correct. And that's helpful for sure, and the earlier in the process the better, because if someone on your committee makes a suggestion that conceptually you need a change, then that's a big change. Okay, I can remember reading my dissertation feedback, and a committee member made a 2-sentence suggestion, and that meant weeks of work. Okay, you need to rethink your argument here, or basically telling me that my initial idea, my conception of the project was wrong. And those are big changes, and those take time to fix. The flip side is, and unfortunately the Writing Center won't give you this, is grammar, punctuation, structure, and style. So stylistic or very specific word by word, line by line feedback. And if you're new to writing, and I know several of you are not English as your primary language, you may need a little bit more help here. And so it's my goal to give you feedback in both directions. But for yourselves, as you're reading one another's work, you're kind of looking both kind of at the forest floor, at each individual tree, and then the view from above. Okay, so the goal of feedback that I'm going to provide you is not just to say, oh, this is terrible, or rethink or reword. That's not very helpful. So the true value of feedback comes with the directionality of your comments. Okay, these need to be steps that the writer can take in order to tighten up his or her manuscript, in order to make for a better argument. We've talked about the purpose of the argument, and if we are able to better structure that argument and better substantiate the claims that we make, then that's going to improve the overall quality of the document that we're producing. Okay? So your textbook talks about some things to avoid. Okay? Don't obsess over what's missing. All of us have documents that are works in progress. I will begin to see those in the coming weeks as you upload your first draft. Okay? There are obviously going to be some things that aren't there yet. Okay? It's a waste of my time as your reviewer, and it's a demotivating waste of your time as the writer for me to say, oh, well, you haven't finished the back half of your manuscript. Well, no kidding. Okay? Instead of obsessing over what's missing, my feedback to you is intended to reflect on what you have produced so far and provide guidance for next steps. As an author, it's usually pretty helpful to provide that outline. Don't just stop at the end of your second rung of your argument. Okay? Outline what those other rungs are. Even if you haven't written that yet, that will help your reviewer kind of understand where you're going with that argument. So outlining is a critical step. You don't have to have written the whole thing. You don't have to have hung all of the details on the framework. But the better you can provide that framework, the better able your reviewer is to help steer you conceptually. Okay? Also, my goal early on is not to fix everything. I may identify some egregious errors, and I'll note those. But I'm not going to go through with a fine-tooth comb. So recognize that just because I don't make a comment doesn't mean it's necessarily right. Okay? I understand that the first draft that you submit is not your final draft, and you are constantly going to be refining, and you'll be applying some of these strategies to assess your work and change your work and improve your work. So as your reviewer, I'm probably going to give you a fair mixture of both conceptual and ground level. But that just because I don't note it doesn't mean that there aren't still issues that could be improved. Okay, when you are reviewing work, whether it's for a classmate or in the future for a student, there are some examples in your book that were kind of shockingly, they kind of triggered my PTSD. I had a couple of doctoral committee members who were kind of notorious for shredding your work, and they would tell you that it sucked in not so nice words. Okay, and that's kind of an old school mentality. Okay, is that going to help me produce a better manuscript for you to say, oh, this section is complete garbage? No, not really. No. So I'm a firm believer in providing a compliment sandwich. Okay, I'll compliment you for, hey, I love the way you structured this. This is a unique piece that needs to be written. That's not just pleasantry. I'm not just saying that to stroke your ego. That sets the tone for you taking my criticisms and understanding that I'm not just looking to fault find here. I'm complimenting what you've done well to let you know I read it. It resonated with me. There's value in what you're doing. And with that value, we owe it to you and to the manuscript to do the best job we possibly can in tightening things up. We don't want to leave holes in things. We don't want to leave you open to criticisms if this thing is published. And then, if I really want to, I can end with some comment. Hey, you've got a great start here, a little more effort, and a little bit more time, and you're going to have a great finished product. that tends to be a little bit more palatable than to just go straight in with the criticisms. Okay. So you will grade your partners, or not grade, but review your partner's work. I would encourage you to kind of follow that strategy. Give them feedback, both positive and negative. All right, in a working document, it's really important to be as specific as we can. If I'm giving you that ground level feedback and I say, oh, you misplaced a modifier somewhere in the document, that doesn't help. If I say sentence structure is awkward and needs to be revised on page 6, line 4, or paragraph 2. I mean, we can do this without line numbers, but it's usually pretty helpful to start there. A little trick I've learned along the way is that it is better if I'm editing a document to start at the back and work forward. And the reason for that is if I start as it's to be read from page 1 and forward, and let's say you suggest, hey, delete the paragraph on page 1, line 12 through 24. If I make that change right away, every other comment that my reviewer has made is, if they're not using track changes at least, is now going to be invalidated. Those line numbers and page numbers that my reader referenced aren't going to be accurate. On the other hand, if I start at the back and work my way to the front, those changes aren't going to impact what lies ahead. Okay? If I'm using track changes, honestly, it doesn't matter. But like for some documents, it just makes sense to make reference to the page and line number. So start at the back, work forward. Okay. Another helpful trick for a reviewer is, for me as your reviewer, to kind of reiterate what I understood. And the reason that's valuable is because that's going to give you some insight. So for a lot of you, your research project is not my primary skill set. Okay? Hearing and language sciences, I'm learning. You're teaching me as the course goes along, and as I read your papers, I hope to have a better appreciation for what it is you do. But my background knowledge is zero. Okay? So if I read through your manuscript and I tell you what I understood and it's completely wrong, that's going to give you some valuable insight. Okay, maybe I need to restructure this. Brooks is a fairly bright guy, and if he completely missed what I was trying to do, then this might be written exclusively for a target audience that only understands speech language hearing sciences. Okay, so by reiterating what I understood, you get some insight as to the clarity of your piece. And by the same token, if what I tell you I understood is accurate, you've got some confirmation. Hey, I did a pretty good job describing that. That's helpful. Okay. As a reviewer, I don't just want to nitpick commas and semicolons and em dashes and en dashes. I want to try to give you some suggestions, both within, as specific, and from above, conceptually. Okay. Consider this. So you may see some of my suggestions at the end. That doesn't mean I expect you to make those changes. That means I need you to kind of think about whether or not that would help your argument. Ultimately, it is your paper, and it is your work, and it's your baby. The suggestions that I provide are not, if they are just that, if they are suggestions, then you can choose to overlook them. They may not even make sense in some places. I've had people that didn't know my content area, and they'll make a suggestion, and it just didn't, that's not how this profession, or that's not how this technique works. So providing suggestions can be a beneficial addition. And then also think big picture. Okay, what's the ultimate goal here? Go back to that idea of, what is my foundational argument? Pull out that worksheet from a couple weeks ago where I asked you to kind of, in words, jot down what your argument was. And you may need to revisit that. Okay, your paper should always be working toward that argument. Okay, this is the issue, and this is how I'm attacking it, and everything I've provided here is to substantiate or support or uplift, upgird that argument. All right, receiving feedback. I can tell you, in years past, my ego and my lack of, in a way, my insecurity, okay? Those things made me a difficult student to mentor, a difficult student to receive feedback. I didn't want to take it, and I took every comment as a personal attack. Like, you think I don't know how to write? You think I'm stupid? And that is never my intent for you. I can't conclusively tell you that that wasn't my dissertation committee's intent. I think in some ways, some people use that as an ability or an opportunity to exert their dominance. That's not my goal, okay? So for you, as the student receiving feedback, or if you're shopping this to somebody, you got a colleague, and hey, I'd like you to read through this. Don't just send them the copy of your manuscript with no instructions. Provide them with instructions. Now, those are understood. If I'm your faculty member in a writing class, I know what my instructions are. I'm going to edit this. I'm going to read through this. I'm going to look for conceptual holes in your argument. I'm going to look for specific grammatical, stylistic errors. I know what those are. If you're sending a document to a colleague, the more specific you can be, the better. Okay, hey, I'm working on this manuscript. Would you mind taking a look at it? They say yes. Then you send it to them with instructions. You know, if you can be specific as far as whether or not their efforts would warrant adding them to the author list, be specific. Hey, if you would edit through this, I'm certainly going to be listed as first author, and my colleague will be second, but if you're willing to commit some time and effort to this, we'd be willing to add you as a third author. In particular, we had some trouble with the methods section, or hopefully not, but maybe the discussion. Okay, I had trouble kind of tying this to the existing literature. Would you take a look at that? So if you've got some particular areas of concern, be specific there. Okay, this should never be personal. So if I make comments or suggestions, they aren't intended to malign your character. They aren't intended to, I'm not trying to say anything about you. My intent is to help your manuscript be better. Okay. As you are receiving that feedback, really fully listen. If it's written, read it and receive it. Okay. What you don't want to do is to structure your defensive arguments as you're hearing this criticism. Okay. The best student is the student who is willing to receive correction and who is willing to take those recommendations and mold or meld them into the person that they already are. Ultimately, this is your paper. So if I make suggestions and you fundamentally disagree, so just like the story I told you last week about my book on baseball, that chapter on race, I felt like was a critical part of the story. And it was my book. And so what if it meant it didn't get published by that publisher? I took it somewhere else and we got it published there. Okay, that is your work. It is you own it. And to the extent you are willing to hand that over, it's your decision to make. If a journal says, oh, you can't include this, it's always your choice to say, well, if you can't include that, I'm going to withdraw my submission and I'm going to attempt to publish this elsewhere. It's your work. Okay. The same holds true for work with a professor or work with a dissertation committee member. All right. So that speaks to how you receive and provide feedback to colleagues or to teachers. That doesn't speak to how you edit your own work. Remember we said, don't fall in love with your first draft. It's probably not that good. there need to be some steps between. There's not just, I need to market a PhD magic wand and you just wave it over your hard drive and it takes that first draft and magically turns it into final copy. I bet I could sell plenty that as gag gifts, a final draft magic wand. Unfortunately, that doesn't exist. Since that's the case, you've got to be able to edit your own work. And so Belcher does a great job of giving you a systematized way of going through your own work, identifying problem areas, and finding ways to refine and improve it line by line, sentence by sentence. Okay, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about this. I would just direct you to chapter 10. Take page 1 of your manuscript and get some colored pencils, or if you're doing it electronically, highlight using different colors. Again, I'm a bit of an old school person here, and I really like kind of starting with this identification process on real paper, okay, and finding these things and then kind of moving to electronic to make the fixes. So the first thing Belcher suggests is you give the whole thing a read, looking for potential red flags. These are common word choices or things that get inserted into sentences or phrases that are frequently misused. Okay, so and or, look for those, make sure they are used appropriately. Obviously, and indicates a combination, and or indicates excuse me, a specific choice, one or the other. There and it, these are commonly misused, and lots of times if I have trouble with a particular word choice, I may just restructure it. Notoriously, effect and affect, I have trouble conceptualizing the difference, so I may just use a different word altogether and sidestep that issue. That which and to is commonly misused. One that she didn't include was extraneous thes. Okay, so if you see the in a sentence, circle it and read through it without the there, and if it stands alone without it, ditch it. It's extraneous. It doesn't need to be there. Okay. Another common error that I see in a lot of writing is who and that. Okay, so people are whose, people aren't that's. So a phrase might say, the principal investigator that was involved in the project. Who would be a better word choice there. It kind of conveys the humanity of the situation. Okay. Step 2, once you've gone through and identified those potentially problematic words and ensured that they need to be there and they're the right choice, is considering words that might need to be added. Okay. This, these, and those can oftentimes be kind of leveraged in. Same thing with they, them, their, and its. I don't find that this stage leads to a lot of change. I actually experimented with this process on the manuscript I'm working with, and step 1, I made a fair amount of changes by going through and looking at that first pass of red flags. But with step 2, maybe it's just me. This is not particularly problematic in my writing. She also indicated in the book that this works best for native English speakers. So a lot of you are, kudos to you. I've said this before. I cannot imagine going to your country and trying to write a scholarly manuscript in a whole other language. That to me is it's an incredible feat. I'm proud of you for doing that and for making that effort. It's not something I'm capable of now, and I can't imagine how much work it would take to get me to that point. That said, I don't mean any disrespect by saying that if you're not a native English speaker, that this won't work for you. I mean that's what the author said. She's used this for years, and so you may find that this process isn't necessarily as beneficial as it might be otherwise. Your formal instruction in the English language honestly may help you in some regards. You don't make the same mistakes that a native English speaker would make. Okay. Step 3 is words that might need to be changed. This is a common issue, is parallelism from start to finish in the document. Lots of times I love the idea that we're on a writing schedule and we're chipping away at a document, but what I've discovered in my own work is when I do that, I have a tendency for it not to be cohesive, and I don't use the same terminology or wording consistently from start to finish in the document. And that's okay for the first draft. Remember, it's probably not that good, but I want to catch those issues as I make my subsequent passes through. So make sure that your verb tenses are consistent. If we say the research participants were inducted, or we had an induction process through which participants completed video training and signed forms, and then later on we say those same participants are, just be consistent with verb tenses there. And there's some others here that you might need to get rid of or eliminate altogether. Not oftentimes can be reworded, makes it more positive, and it also eliminates some verbiage. Very, I will almost always strike through the word very. That to me is third grade writing. I don't want to say something is very bad. It might be, but what's a more descriptive word I could use to describe something that's very bad? The findings were troubling. The findings were alarming. Those are both very bad, but those speak more specifically to what we found. Okay. Now, I don't know if you've used a tool like Grammarly, but that is something that I would encourage you to try. I believe there's a 30-day free trial for anybody, and then you can purchase it as a plugin for Word. I would tell you, go through this 3-step process first, and use Grammarly last. It can be used as a teaching tool, but if I'm just relying on the tool itself to do that editing for me, then I'm not becoming a better writer. Spelling is a great example. Okay, there are words I don't know how to spell. I just make a stab at them and I expect Word to fix them. Okay, that's not a great approach, and it's sure as heck not an approach I need to take when I'm trying to learn how to structure a scholarly argument. All right, so this week was the last chapter, really the only chapter in the Sylvia book we didn't look at was grants, because I understand that's a standalone, separate course altogether. But the last chapter is really kind of marching orders. It's encouragement, it's motivation to kind of get out there and write some stuff. And we actually, Kenyatta read this quote aloud this week, but I love this ending of this book. And honestly, I'm going to miss not being in this as we move forward the rest of the semester. But I would encourage you to put this on your desk where you write and revisit it from time to time. But just recognize that this is, you've literally crossed the threshold on your professional writing journey. And you may have some things that you've published already. I don't think anybody has. I remember from class, but you're going to. At the end of this semester, my hope is you submit what you produce for publication somewhere. But when you think of the good things to be written, you should take courage. There's no end to them. Okay, that's how science is elevated. People build upon the work of others, take the next logical step themselves. But it's a pretty exciting time for you because you know that yourself, you're going to write some of them. So be encouraged, get to work. Hope you have a great week with Dr. James, and I look forward to reading the submissions that you're going to make as soon as I get back from visiting some family. So thanks a lot. I appreciate y'all and look forward to seeing you in class next week. Brooks signing out.